So today we're going to talk about something that really defined the start of a new era, the 1990 Gulf War. I mean, this was the first big international crisis after the Cold War ended. And believe it or not, the aftershocks from it, well, they're still shaping the world we live in right now.
That's a pretty chilling question, right? But in the summer of 1990, the world learned that this wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. It was real.
Yeah, you heard that right. August 2nd, 1990. In less time than it takes to get through a workday, an entire sovereign nation was just gone. Poof, swallowed whole by its neighbor.
So what happened? Well, a massive Iraqi army, we're talking 100,000 soldiers, just stormed right across the border. They completely overwhelmed Kuwait's defenses. The government had to flee into exile in Saudi Arabia. And just like that, the world was staring down a crisis that was, well, it was totally unprecedented.
Okay, so the big question is, why? Why did this happen? And the answer isn't simple. It wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of history, economics, and honestly, a whole lot of paranoia that had been building up for years. And Saddam Hussein, he had a whole list of reasons, or, grievances, to justify it all. First, there was this old territorial dispute. He claimed Kuwait was historically Iraq's 19th province. Then there was money, a lot of it. He wanted Kuwait to forgive a massive $14 billion war debt. He also accused them of economic warfare, saying they were deliberately overproducing oil to tank the prices and bankrupt Iraq. He even claimed they were using something called slant drilling to literally steal oil from under the border. And kind of bubbling under all of this was this deep geopolitical paranoia, this belief that Kuwait was just a pawn in a bigger U.S. plot to destroy him. So how did the world react? Well, the reaction was immediate, and honestly, it was stunningly unified. You have to remember, the Cold War had just ended, and for the first time, really, the international community spoke with one voice and drew a very clear line in the sand.
And things escalated fast. So August 2nd, you have the invasion. Before the month is even over, Iraq formally annexes the whole country. The world responds with Operation Desert Shield, this huge 5-month-long buildup of forces. And then, on January 17th, 1991, that shield turns into a sword. The offensive begins, Operation Desert Storm.
And the scale of this global response, it was just massive. I mean, get this, a coalition of 42 different countries. And this wasn't just the usual suspects. It included major Arab nations like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, all of them united with one single goal: get the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. So after a month of pretty devastating airstrikes, the ground war finally kicks off. And it's over in a flash. The actual ground offensive to free Kuwait, it took just 100 hours. Think about that. A little over 4 days.
But here's the thing. The end of the shooting wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. It was really just the beginning of the fallout. The war unleashed these devastating ripple effects that just kept spreading across the region and really across the whole globe.
Okay, so ripple number one was economic. The second the invasion happened, all of Iraq's and Kuwait's oil vanished from the global market, just gone. And the effect was immediate. The price of a barrel of oil more than doubled in just 3 months. It shot up from about $17 to $36.
And this is a perfect example of how interconnected everything is. You take a country like India, thousands of miles away. That oil price spike, plus the fact that they lost all this income from Indian workers who were in the Gulf, it was a total knockout blow. The country was pushed right to the brink of bankruptcy. And it forced them to completely overhaul their economy, getting rid of this complex system of controls they called the license Raj, and making these huge free market reforms that literally define India's economy to this day.
The next ripple was environmental, and this was just devastating. As Saddam's army retreated, they committed this act of, really, environmental terrorism. They set fire to more than 700 Kuwaiti oil wells. The entire region was just choked in this thick, toxic smoke for months on end. The images were apocalyptic.
And then there was the human ripple, which was immense. After the war, Kuwait turned on its own long-standing Palestinian community. They accused them of collaborating with the Iraqis, and the result was this campaign of collective punishment. We're talking about as many as 400,000 people who were expelled or forced to flee their homes. And all of this, it brings us to the legacy. Because, and this is so important, if you really want to understand the conflicts of the 21st century,
You absolutely have to go back and look at what was left unfinished, what was left unresolved back in 1991. At the time, there was a lot of optimism. President George H.W. Bush gave this famous speech talking about a new world order. The idea was that this was the start of a future where international law, not the law of the jungle, would rule. But that vision and the popular idea of a clean, surgical war, it didn't quite line up with the on-the-ground reality. The media, they were fascinated by this new technology, the smart bombs. But the truth is, something like 70% of the bombs dropped were just regular, unguided dumb bombs. And then you had these incredibly grim events, like what became known as the Highway of Death, where retreating Iraqi soldiers were just annihilated. It raised these really profound ethical questions about disproportionate force that we're still grappling with.
So this is the really crucial takeaway. The way the war ended directly planted the seeds for future conflicts. Think about it. Saddam Hussein was left in power. Iraq was hit with a decade of crippling sanctions that caused a massive humanitarian crisis. The U.S. established a permanent military presence in Saudi Arabia, the home of Islam's holiest sites. And all of these things became core grievances and powerful recruiting tools for a new group that was just starting to emerge, Al-Qaeda.
And the long-term human cost was just staggering. The estimates are that more than 200,000 Iraqi civilians died, either as a direct result of the war or from the brutal decade of sanctions that came after. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Can a war be a perfect, textbook military victory and, at the exact same time, be a catastrophic strategic failure? The Gulf War was, by any military metric you can find, a stunning success. But did it also set the stage for decades of instability that followed? And that, right there, is the complex, messy, and enduring legacy of the conflict that truly reshaped our world.